So we are very fortunate to have the kickoff seminar for this semester with Professor Milind Tambe as a distinguished speaker. Professor Tambe is Gordon K. Mackay Professor of Computer Science and Director of Center for Research in Computation and Society at Harvard University. He is also the Director of AI for Social Good at Google Research India. Professor Tambe is a recipient of the Ichkai John McCarthy Award, SCM SIG AI Autonomous Agents Research Award from AAMAS, Triple AI Robert S. Engelmore Memorial Lecture Award, Informs Wagner Prize, Rist Prize of the Military Operations Research Society, and Columbus Fellowship Foundation Homeland Security Award. And you have seen his bios, illustrious bios, a lot of different awards that he has gotten. And he has also received the meritorious commendations from agencies such as the US Coast Guard and the Los Angeles Airport. Professor Tambe is a fellow of Triple AI, American Association for the Artificial Intelligence, and SCM, Association for Computing Machinery. So without much ado, let us give a big hands to Professor Tambe. I know that we are not meeting him in person, but he is very engaged and you'll see from his talk. So let's give a warm welcome to Professor Tambe. So Milind, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. A really very kind introduction, Sajal. And I was there, as Sajal, you and I were talking earlier a few years ago. And so I remember that visit very well. And thank you for the warm hospitality then and also now. So I plan to speak for about 45, 50 minutes and then open it up for questions. Of course, if there are questions along the way, please feel free to ask them. I may not be able to see your hand raised, so you may have to actually interrupt me. All right. So my work, for the past 15 years or so has been focused on using AI and multi-agent systems for social impact. We focused on three areas: public health, conservation, and public safety and security. In all of these areas, the key challenge we focus on is how to optimize our limited intervention resources. So in terms of public health, we have large population to serve, but limited number of public health resources or social workers. Concrete example is work we've done with youth experiencing homelessness in Los Angeles. Harnessing the social networks of these youth, we are able to show that our influence maximization AI algorithms are far more effective in spreading HIV information and reducing HIV risk behaviors compared to traditional approaches that are used by these homeless drop-in centers. The technical areas I'll focus on here are social network algorithms and bandit algorithms. With respect to conservation, we have large conservation areas to protect, but limited number of ranger resources. Concrete example is work we've done in Uganda and Cambodia. Harnessing past poaching data, we are able to predict where poachers set traps or snares, and for the past several years have been able to remove a large number of these snares, hundreds or even thousands. The technical area I'll focus on here are green security games, which combine machine learning and game theory. With respect to public safety and security, we've contributed a new model called Stackelberg Security Games and contributed new algorithms that have been in use by security agencies such as the US Federal Air Marshal Service, the US Coast Guard, and others. Today, I'll focus on just the public health and conservation topics, which are also the focus of our work at Google Research Bangalore, focusing and here are some nonprofits that we've worked on in Bangalore. Given the limited time, I'll only focus on one of the projects that we have ongoing in Bangalore. As you look across all of these projects, there's three common themes. First, the use of multi-agent systems research, which is my area of work, social networks, game theory, and others. Second, embracing this data to deployment pipeline. By that I mean, our first step is always to immerse ourselves in the domain, trying to understand the problems that are faced by these nonprofits, trying to understand what kind of data are available. Following that, predictive models makes predictions on of the data available, which cases are high risk versus which cases are low risk. Now, we cannot intervene on all of the high risk cases given limited resources. So our multi-agent reasoning intervention algorithms prescribe, recommend for us which cases to actually intervene on. Following that, field testing and deployment comes in not only because we want to understand the limitations of our models and algorithms, but because social impact is a key objective of our work. It's a first class citizen of this area of work. And so if we don't achieve AI for social impact, then we can't quite call ourselves engaged in AI for social impact work. Another aspect of this work is lack of data is often a norm. So we are supposed to be in this era of big data, swimming in big data, but often in these domains where we're working with marginalized or endangered communities, we face a lack of data. And this, you will see, is a repeated theme where we are trying to struggle with handling limitations of the data available. Finally, all of the work is only possible because of the interdisciplinary partnerships with nonprofits around the world, whether they're homeless drop-in centers in Los Angeles or wildlife conservation organizations around the world, or other public health or conservation nonprofits in India. The work we do is in service of empowering these nonprofits to use AI tools. They are engaged in such inspiring work, and we want to avoid being gatekeepers to this AI technology for social impact. So in the rest of the presentation, I'll start by providing you, some information on the work we're doing in public health, then in conservation. I'll cover papers from the last 3 to 4 years in conferences such as AMAS, AAA, and so forth. And I'll highlight the role of the lead PhD student or postdoc by putting up their pictures in the top right-hand corners of the slides on which their work is shown, so you know who led the work. So let's start with public health. Here I'll use for motivation this challenge of HIV prevention amongst youth experiencing homelessness. The rates of HIV in this population are 10 times the rates of the normal house population. In fact, there's 6,000 youth who sleep on the streets of Los Angeles every night, which is where we have focused this work in. Now, we cannot communicate HIV risk prevention message to all 6,000 youth individually. Therefore, homeless shelters or drop-in centers adopt this peer-led intervention strategy. They'll call in the peer leaders, educate them about HIV prevention, and expect the peer leaders to talk to their friends and their friends to talk to their friends. And in this way, information to spread in the social network. This is face-to-face interaction. This is not happening over Facebook, etc. So this problem is essentially this problem of influence maximization in social networks that many of you may be familiar with in computer science. Given a social network graph G, we are trying to choose K peer leader nodes such that we maximize the expected number of influence nodes. Now, information is supposed to spread in this independent cascade model, meaning we give information about HIV prevention to youth A will talk to their friend B will talk to their friend C, and information will cascade in this network. As we apply these standard influence maximization algorithms to our domains, however, there are several challenges. I'll focus on 3. First, there's uncertainty in propagation probability over edges. Second, we can't have a situation where we bring in all peer leaders all at once. We have capacity limits. And so we call in a few of these peer leaders, but given the unfortunate circumstances these peer leaders are in, some of them may not be able to attend, which means that next time we call the next batch, we have to take into account who showed up in the first batch. So we have a requirement for a multi-step dynamic policy to handle no-shows. And third, the social network itself is not known. All we can do is have a limited querying budget. So we query a few of these peer leaders, few of the people in the network to sample the network. Now, I'm going to address all of these challenges starting from the top. Initially, we'll assume the social network is known and then work our way downwards towards a situation when the social network itself is not known. So let's start with this uncertainty in propagation probabilities. Normally, if we assume that when we talk to a youth C about HIV prevention, their neighbor, their friend D, will get to know about HIV prevention with a known probability, let's say zero point 0.4. In our domain, immersion in the domain showed us that it is very difficult to get hold of these probabilities. Instead, we can model this as being sampled from some distribution. Now, we may not know the mean of this distribution, so we can say that this mean lies within some interval. So now we have this challenge of robust influence maximization, of trying to spread influence when there's uncertainty in information propagation probability. We solve this problem by casting it as a game where our algorithm is trying to choose peer leaders and nature is trying to set parameter settings to cause our algorithm to perform as worse as possible. So we are trying to maximize spread of influence and nature is trying to minimize, where the payoff is determined by the ratio of the outcome of our particular policy, our particular choice of peer leaders, compared to the optimal choice had we known those parameters ahead of time. Now, there are some details here about mixed strategies and pure strategies in the game. They are available in the paper, but I'm going to describe to you the key intuition about how to solve this game. Now, along the rows here are the policies that the influencer is trying to choose. We are trying to choose something like, let's say, 20 peer leaders or 30 peer leaders in a network of 400 youth. So we have 400 choose 30 choices along the rows for our policies. Nature is playing along the columns and is choosing parameters from a continuous setting. So you can imagine that there is a vast number of rows, of strategies for the influencer. And of course, nature is choosing from a continuous interval. So there's a very large set of strategies available for nature as well. So this is a very large scale game. We cannot represent it in memory, let alone trying to solve it. So these problems are solved using this double oracle approach. So we start by initializing the game with a small number of strategies on both sides, maybe 2 or 3 each. And then the influencer's oracle will provide the next best policy to add. So we solve the game and the influencer's oracle says, this is the next best policy to add. And nature's oracle will give a best response and say, this is the next best set of parameters to add to the game. And the game will grow and we iterate in this fashion until convergence and show that we can converge with approximation guarantees, even though we iterate only a small number of times. So this allows us to solve this game, giving us a robust strategy without actually representing the full game, only representing a very small fraction of the game. The second problem I mentioned is that, we may want these 40 youth to be acting as peer leaders, but we cannot bring them all in because our homeless shelter has a limited capacity. So we may only be able to invite, let's say, 4 of them to come at a time. Now, one of them may not have bus fare and may ask their friend to attend. Another one may be forced to run away from the city. So we may have called a certain set of 4 youth, but not those 4 youth don't show up. What happens is 3 of them may have shown up. So the next time we choose the next 4, which are shown in green, we have to take into account who showed up in the first time step. Now, the state of the network itself is unfortunately not available to us at this time. So this is a problem of planning under action and observation uncertainty, which is essentially solvable using POMDPs, partially observable Markov decision problems. So these are going to recommend to us which youth to invite, and based on who showed up, tell us which next 4 youth to invite. Now, solving these POMDPs on a large scale network is also very difficult. But one key idea is to understand that there are sub-communities of these youth who play on basketball together, youth who play on Venice Beach together. And so we can divide up the problem into smaller partitions of these POMDPs, and in this way are able to solve this problem in a tractable fashion. The third challenge is we don't have a full social network. Now you can imagine sending our social work colleagues into the homeless shelter, asking everybody, who are your friends and so forth, and then tediously collecting data on the entire social network. But this is extremely costly and not scalable. Could we sample a small fraction, 15% of the networks, 15% of the youth, and obtain the information we need? So essentially, the problem is given the total number of nodes, that is, let's say, 400 youth, we have a query budget. Let's say we can query only 40 of these youth. Can we, after querying 40 youth to sample the network, output the set of peer leaders we want to choose to spread influence such that the performance of the choice we have made is similar to what we would have obtained had we known the exact full network? So purely from so how to solve this problem, we have a sampling algorithm. Essentially, it samples nodes randomly and estimates the sizes of the community that the nodes belongs to, and then chooses seeds from the largest k communities. We have some guarantees on the performance of this algorithm. This is a Brian Wilder, who led the paper in AAA 2018, has a lot of analysis. If you're interested, I highly encourage you to look at this work. So at this point, I have mentioned to you how we solved each of these challenges. Network sampling, there's a robust policy and multi-step policy. Putting it all together, we have this system, I'll call it sampling healer. A sampling because we don't know the full network, we are sampling the network. And it is going to recommend to us which peer leaders to select. So it will select 4 peer leaders, and then based on who showed up, choose the next set of peer leaders. I'm seeing that there are some questions that may be getting accumulated in the chat window. I'm going to take a break, and then after this section is over, and then maybe take a look at those questions and try to answer some. So, Sajal, you want to say something?
No. You can go ahead.
Okay. So at this point, having built this system of sampling healer, we decided now it was time to do a pilot test. So we recruited 230 youth, 60 under each condition. There are 4 conditions. First, sampling healer, that is the network is only sampled, 60 youth under this condition. Healer, which is exactly like our sampling healer algorithm, except we cheat and give it the full network. Again, around 60 youth in that. Healer plus is a version of healer. Degree centrality is the traditional approach. This approach calls in the most popular youth, the one with the highest degrees in the network. And again, we try to recruit 60 youth in this condition. So there are 4 separate bins, and now in each situation, we recruit 12 peer leaders according to the recommendation of that particular algorithm. And this is a picture from an actual information session where our social work colleagues are educating these homeless youth about HIV prevention. This is a day-long education session, at the end of which the peer leaders are supposed to talk to their friends, and then their friends will talk to their friends, and so forth. So question is, how many of the non-peer leaders, the people we did not bring in, got educated about HIV? And here's what we find. With degree centrality, which is the traditional approach, 25% of the non-peer leaders got educated about HIV. With healer, which knew the full network, 75% of the non-peer leaders got informed. So clearly, these influence maximization algorithms are far more effective in spreading HIV information compared to this traditional approach. But sampling healer, which only knew a fraction of the network, performs similarly to healer, which knew the full network. Now, it actually seems to be performing better, but that's just possibly a small variation due to the experimental condition. What ultimately the message to be taken away from here is that sampling healer seems to perform really well compared to the degree centrality approach, and hence for the larger scale study, this was the approach we decided to carry forward. Now, in the larger scale study, we recruited 750 youth. This is work done jointly with Professor Eric Rice in social work. And this is, as far as we know, the first large scale application of influence maximization for public health. This was done in collaboration with 3 homeless shelters in Los Angeles, My Friend's Place, Los Angeles LGBT Center, and Safe Place for Youth. There were 250 youth recruited in each of the 3 conditions. First, sampling healer. Second, degree centrality, the more traditional approach. And third, no intervention at all. And so Here we are not only interested in who got informed, but whether there was actually any change in behavior. So we recruited the peer leaders for each condition based on the recommendations of the relevant algorithm. Then we checked what happened after 1 month. Then we checked what happened after 3 months. And here's what we find. So at the end of 1 month, in terms of reduction in condomless anal sex, what you will see here is that sampling healer leads to 35%, close to 35% reduction, but with degree centrality and control this HIV risk behavior, there is no change at all at the end of 1 month. At the end of 3 months, degree centrality begins to catch up, but it's still not as good as our sampling healer approach. Now, the fact that sampling healer got changes in behavior faster is very important because this is a risk behavior. And also because it's a community where people come and go. It's a place where people are not just statically placed, which means that having this information out there faster is important. Similarly, in other metrics like a reduction in condomless vaginal sex, you will again see that sampling healer performs better. So this clearly has pleased our collaborators, and this is what they have to say.
Beautiful way to kind of like marry this tech world with this social service world, like, and how we can kind of go deeper and impact young people and elevate them.
If this group became a really big thing, it could really help out a lot of youth.
And so this is now continuing on in terms of research. We are looking at other approaches such as using reinforcement learning. This has shown some improvement over our earlier approaches, but it's very exciting to see what else is possible and to test this out in the real world. Simultaneously, we have been talking to these shelters to adopt these policies as a way of continuing their work on a regular basis. So it's very exciting in terms of both research and continuing this deployment in practice. This HIV prevention is not the only application in terms of public health for social networks. Another one is suicide prevention. Here, one way this can be done is by gatekeeper selection. Gatekeepers are community members who will keep an eye out on their peers to try to alert counselors if the peers say something that may lead such a referral to be made. So for example, if somebody in the community says, sometimes I want to sleep and never get up, then one of the gatekeepers may be able to alert a counselor or refer the youth to a counselor. Now, we have a limited number of gatekeepers who we can select and train, and they have to cover the entire graph. So this seems like a graph covering problem. However, some of the gatekeepers may not be able to perform the task allocated to them. And therefore, this becomes like a robust graph covering problem with gatekeepers. To maximize worst case coverage of the graph, knowing that some of the gatekeepers are not going to be able to perform their task. So we chose some recent algorithms from robust graph covering and tried to apply it in this context. And what we found is there's disparity across different racial groups. And so to avoid this kind of racial disparity and ensure fairness, we've looked at approaches such as max-min fairness, diversity constraints, which comes from cooperative game theory, and there are papers published at NeurIPS and ICHCAI. But at our recent AAAI paper, what we point out is that it may be better for a human in the loop to make these decisions so that the system essentially offers different trade-offs that are possible in terms of fairness and performance. So at this time, I'm going to switch and move on to the next set of applications, which is based on health program adherence. Here, I'm going to start talking about work we are doing at Google Research India. And so the problem we have focused on here is maternal and child care. The situation in India with respect to maternal child care is very dire. A woman dies in childbirth every 15 minutes in India. 4 out of 10 children are too thin or short. And we are very fortunate to be working with a nonprofit called Arman, which serves 18 million women and has 160,000 health workers who work for them. One of their programs is called M-Mitra, a mobile friend. And so they give a call every week, automated voice call, in the voice of a local health worker, in the local language. It's a friendly 3-minute message about health. Something like, You are in the 6th week of pregnancy, enroll in this government program. Your child is 3 months old, give them this health supplement. Arman has shown that women who enroll in this program, Mitra, in randomized control trials, they have shown there's significant benefit that the women accrue in terms of their own health and health of the babies. 2.2 million women are enrolled in Mitra. Unfortunately, some fraction of these women, a large 30% up to women, may enroll and then become low listeners or drop out. Thus, they don't get the benefits of Mitra. The question for us is, can we predict who's going to drop out before they drop out so that Arman can intervene on them and stop them from leaving the program? So basic problem is how to predict which beneficiaries are likely to drop out to allow Arman to focus intervention. Here's what we get in terms of input. So here's mother number one, mom number one. The first week, Arman gives an automated call. She does not pick up the phone. Week 2, she picks up. Week 3, she picks up. Week 4, she picks up. Week 5, she picks up. Mom number 2 listens to the voice call, automated call in week 1 and week 2, but not in week 3. Yes, in week 4, but not in week 5. And so on for hundreds of thousands of these moms. Now, it turned out in this particular example that eventually mom number 2 and mom number 4 dropped out of the program. This is a loss to these moms, to the program. If we could tell Arman after the first 5 weeks itself, for example, that these two moms are at a high risk of drop off, then Arman could do a live call or go send health workers to their home to understand why they're not, why they are at high risk. And sometimes there are small adjustments as to the timing of the call or other small adjustments that allows these women to be retained in the program. So this is the system that we've built. We first did extensive tests with past data. Then we did this pilot where we got data from beneficiaries enrolled in November and December of 2019. And then I ran a test through January of April 2020 to check if our predictions were accurate. And what we find is that in terms of accuracy metrics like F1 recall, precision, etc., this system is quite accurate, more than 0.8 with respect to all of these measures. And so this is where the system is now deployed. We are doing these pilot tests where not only are these women, we are flagging women who are at high risk of drop off, but then intervening on those women to retain them in the program. So we're very excited by seeing that this has, this could start helping the 300,000 beneficiaries who are enrolled in this program. A similar adherence problem also arises in tuberculosis prevention. Tuberculosis is a has been a disease that has killed millions around the world. In India alone, it causes 500,000 deaths per year and 3 million are infected every year. In the time of COVID, some of these numbers don't seem as big, but these are big numbers. And one big problem here is non-adherence to TB treatment. Patients are supposed to take their medicine for 6 months, but after a few weeks, they drop off of the program. And this is bad for them because they themselves don't get well, and it leads to drug-resistant bacteria, so it's bad for society. So to avoid this dropping off, there's digital adherence tracking. So essentially, you can see this pill pack here that is shown. And so every time you open a pill, there's a randomized phone number that is shown. And so the patient is supposed to call the phone number to let the health worker know that I have taken my medicine today. And the phone number is randomized, so you can't know what it is before you open that particular pill. Now, health workers can see, oh, somebody has not called for a few days, and then realize this person is dropping off from the program, then again, go to their home or try to get them to adhere. But that means that they've already missed a few doses, and then you figure out that this person is dropping out. Could we predict in advance and intervene before patients miss the dose? And again, similar to the Arman, we can look at the phone call pattern and make predictions. And this is work done with a nonprofit called Everwell, where with data from 15,000 patients and 1.5 million phone calls, we're able to show that our predictions are more effective than their rule-based system in terms of improving the rate of true positives, reducing the rate of false positives. And we are going through IRB approvals and all of that to test this in practice. So far I've talked to you about making predictions as to who's at high risk. But the next thing is prescription, who to actually intervene on, because we cannot intervene on all of the patients. And so imagine that you have a health worker who has to, who has say hundreds of patients under her care, and she has to decide which patients to actually call, because she cannot call all hundreds of patients in one day. So she may say, okay, among these high risk patients, I'm going to call the first three, and then finds out that this is related to this TB domain. She may find out that two of them took their medicine, but one of them did not. So now she encourages all of them to continue to take their medicine, and she has to decide which three patients can I call tomorrow. So she may call the next three, and then figure out that one of them has not taken their medicine, and then based on that decide who to call the next day, and on and on and on for 180 days, which is the length of which the medicine has to be taken. So every day there's this choice being made as to who to call. Now, as I understand it today in Mumbai, for example, this work is done in a round robin fashion. Call the first 10, then the next 10, then the next 10, and so forth. Question for us is, can we do better? And the approach we have taken is this idea of restless bandits, adherence restless bandits. So this is a particular model whereby we assume that there are two states. The patient is either adhering, taking their medicine or not. And then we are trying to choose a policy to give to the health worker to try to make sure that she calls them in the policy, in the way specified by the policy. And what this means is that sometimes, somebody is always taking their medicine every time you call them. There is no point in keeping on calling them again and again. Whereas some patients have not taken their medicine, it is important to keep calling them to remind them to take their medicine. So this restless bandits allows us to come up with a policy that is more flexible rather than this round robin policy. And we have new algorithms to generate such policies. And we have shown that compared to previous work in restless bandits, which are shown here in orange, our algorithms are significantly faster and don't lose as much in solution quality. I'll go to the third area of work on COVID modeling, just briefly mention some of the work there, then we can take a quick break to see the questions that people may have. So in March of 2020, we started our work on agent-based modeling for COVID. And so we had a detailed agent-based model in terms of families, comorbidities, age, and so forth. And use this model to make predictions on what would happen if different states change their policies with respect to lockdowns and so forth. And it made some news at the time. Following that, we've been looking at the COVID testing policy. This is a paper that was published in Science Advances last year. So essentially, the range of tests entering the market of varying sensitivity and cost. And the question is, should we go for quantity or quality? So there's the PCR test, which is a gold standard test, which detects very low viral concentration, but costs higher and takes more time to get back results. Whereas something like antigen strip, which is less sensitive, requires higher viral concentration, but is cheaper, and we can get results back quickly. And the question is, if you are a big campus or if you're a small town, which, and you want to test the population, should you use the gold standard test or the antigen strip? Now, for some of these places, if they really test the whole population using this gold standard type test, then that would be a real problem in terms of their budget. So here's what we find in our agent-based model. On the y-axis is number of infections, lower is better. Blue is the more sensitive test, orange is the less sensitive test. And so if we could administer the test on the whole population at the same frequency and get back results instantaneously, then of course the more sensitive test works out better in terms of reducing infections. However, if there is a 1-day delay in getting back results of the more sensitive test, which is what is expected, then all of the benefit of this more sensitive test is lost. The number of infections rises, because the way this is supposed to work is that the whole population is tested. Anybody found positive, we isolate. But if there's a day's delay in isolating these people, then all of the benefit of the more sensitive test is lost. Furthermore, due to cost, if we can only run the more sensitive test every 5 days instead of every 3 days, again, all of the benefit of the more sensitive test is lost. So in short, test sensitivity is secondary to turnaround time and frequency. We should choose a test that has quicker turnaround time and cannot be applied at high frequency, basically something like the antigen strip. This result was seen to be used by the World Health Organization. It was covered extensively in various news outlets, New York Times, Washington Post, etc., and has allowed our epidemiologic collaborators to advocate to FDA and CDC. And in fact, Michael Mina, who's our epidemiologic collaborator at the Harvard School for Public Health, is now advising the Biden COVID task force in terms of this COVID testing policy. So at this point, I'm going to switch topics to talk about conservation. But before I go there, I wanted to see if there are questions. We'll take a 5-minute break for questions, and then we can go back to conservation. So I'm looking at the chat window.
Yeah, I think I can. Yeah, I have kept track of the sequencing. So Ardhendu, you can ask the question.
Hi, Professor Tambe.
So Milind, I'm asking in the order that they pose the question. So to make
fantastic, and we'll take like a 5-minute of questions and then move on, just
Sure.
so that we can. Please go on, Ardhendu.
Yeah, so I was curious about a couple of things actually, but let me. So when you say you sample the network, like, do you give the lesson to somebody and then check if their friends have information about it? How is that done?
That's an excellent question. So sampling the network, basically we're just trying to get information about the network. So we, originally, if you want to know information of the entire network, the way it was done is that a social worker would sit in the homeless shelter, check who's talking to whom. They would give every person a questionnaire saying, who are your top 5 friends? And then based on all of that, draw a full network of who's connected to whom. But they had to survey every single person in the homeless shelter. If there were 100 people, ask questions for 100 people, then sit and make sure that they are, who's talking to whom, all of that. Instead, in the sampling, idea is that you just sample, meaning you give a survey to, let's say, 20 people instead of 100 people. And you say, who are the top 5 people you talk to every day? And based on that sample, which obviously is only a small sample of the network, then you decide who to call for intervention. Does that clarify?
So it is, yes. So it is self-reported sampling as opposed to you checking whether they have actually disseminated the information.
So this is only before information dissemination. This is only trying to gather information on the network. Correct.
Right.
So
okay.
Milind,
I think there
would you
are
like
other
to
questions, so I'll, yeah.
Yeah, Ardhendu, do you have another question?
Oh, the other thing was about the Oracle. I think it was more like a sort of technical question. Like you mentioned convergence in fewer rounds. So I was just trying to think why that is possible. And so I kind of feel that it's when you decide, when the influencer Oracle decides which policy to add, I do not know how it exactly happens in real life, but I assume it needs a lot of information to decide which is the next best.
So the way it is done is that you solve the original game,
yeah.
and then the Oracle just adds a best response to that mixed strategy in the original game. And so it's just the best response given, every time each Oracle just says, this is my best response to the, best opponent policy from the main game. And it is, it is well known, or empirically, you can observe that you converge in a, relatively few number of cycles. So it's not necessary. You may have to, explore a lot of policies, but in practice, it turns out that it just works really well in being able to converge. So convergence means no Oracle can add new policies because there is no, they just don't have a better response. And so it is well known that you empirically, you can often converge much faster. And that's what we observe.
Thank you.
So Milind, would you like to take one more question or want to continue?
I think it's maybe I'll just continue and then we'll just end.
Sure,
Okay, and
please.
then we can continue this conversation. Thank you for these excellent questions. So the conservation part I'll go through. It's a smaller part. I'll go through relatively quickly. So here we are focused on this problem of protecting large wildlife conservation areas. So this is Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda. So there's wonderful wildlife there, but there are threats to the wildlife, traps or snares in the thousands that get placed to maim and kill this beautiful wildlife. And rangers, as you can see in this picture, have to go around the park trying to find these snares. You can see it's not easy for them to find these snares. So the question is, how can we help these rangers? Again, large conservation areas, very limited number of rangers. So one idea is to divide up the park into 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid square. And then using this notion of Stackelberg security games, provide recommendations as to where to patrol to the rangers. So for those who may not be familiar, this is the way the game is played. Again, this is just 2x2 game, but of course, in reality, there's thousands and thousands of square kilometers to play on. So we have the ranger, which is trying to choose which area to go to. And we have a poacher, which looks at where the ranger is going and then react. So for example, if the ranger says, I'm going to area 1 and always going to area 1, then the poacher will put the trap in area 2, getting a positive reward. The ranger gets a negative reward. So generally the result to solve this game, we come up with a defender strategy, meaning we provide a recommendation to the ranger to come up with a mixed strategy, a randomized strategy. Some 60% of the time go to area 1, 40% of the time go to area 2, so that it is difficult for the poacher to predict where to put the snare and to reduce the expected utility of the poacher. Now, traditional work in Stackelberg security game has been focused on a very strategic adversary, whereas what we face here are boundedly rational poachers. And so we can learn how the adversaries, these poachers, are responding to our patrols based on past poaching data. And so we can predict, if we patrol a certain area with a certain frequency, what is the probability, how the poacher might react in terms of continuing to put snares there or in a neighboring area. So what we have is this problem of predicting where the poachers would put snares as a key problem before we get into solving the game. So we are trying to predict where the poachers are going to set traps. We have 14 years of data from Uganda at the time we solved this game. It tells us the ranger patrol frequency per square kilometer. We have data on distance of each grid square to nearest river, road, villages, area slope. I mean, there's a lot of data based on which now trying to make this prediction of probability of placing a snare. There's lots of very interesting challenges here because there's uncertainty, all kinds of uncertainty. In the interest of time, I'm just going to move forward. There's an ensemble model that was developed to solve this problem. Having done it, the next step then was to say, how does it actually perform in the field? Because our collaborators in Uganda were not satisfied just by showing them some results in the lab. They wanted to see it perform well in practice. So we selected 2 9 square kilometer areas in Queen Elizabeth. They're shown in these green dots. The green dots don't overlap with the red dots. Red dots is where previously snares had been found. So now we are telling the rangers to go to new areas. You haven't patrolled these areas, but we are confident you are going to find snares there because this is where our model is predicting there are snares that you haven't caught. So this was a pilot test that was done. This just happened 1 month before a conference deadline. So if the rangers found snares, then we would be able to write a paper. Otherwise, no paper. And so we sent this, the rangers were out patrolling this area for 1 month. And every day they would send back an email saying, today we found nothing, tomorrow, we found nothing, etc. And then they said, we found a poached elephant with its tusks cut off. So this was too sad in the sense that we were too late to save this elephant, but at least the machine learning model was telling us where to go. Then they found a whole elephant snare roll and removed it. So poachers were active in the area. They were killing elephants, but before they could kill the next set of elephants, a whole elephant snare roll was removed. And then 10 antelope snares were removed. So this gave us hope that this model is making good predictions in terms of where to send the rangers. Having completed the pilot test, the next test was to do a full scale test. So this was done in 3 national parks, Queen Elizabeth and Murchison Falls in Uganda, and Sri Pak Wildlife Sanctuary in Cambodia. In each case, we selected 24 areas. In each case, we marked some of these areas as high risk and some as low risk, meaning our model predicted that in all of these areas which were lightly patrolled before or not patrolled before, some of these areas are high risk, we predict, some are low risk. And now we sent the rangers for 6 months to patrol these areas to check if our predictions are accurate. If and it indeed turned out that where we predicted high risk, more snares were found. Where we predicted low risk, less snares were found. So this is building up a lot of confidence that this is the right approach now to be using in national parks in order to save wildlife. In Cambodia, compared to 2018, there was a 5-fold increase in the number of snare captures per month. So this is really beneficial for our rangers who are putting their lives on the line trying to protect wildlife around the globe. So far I've talked to you about predicting where there is a danger of seeing snares, but having given these predictions, rangers have to plan patrol coverage. So now, having gotten these predictions, the next step is to optimize patrol coverage. This can be done first, do prediction, then separately do planning to for patrol coverage. However, if you do this in 2 separate stages, this turns out to be suboptimal. It is better to take into account what it is that we are trying to do, which is to plan patrol coverage during the prediction phase itself. So the loss function of the prediction stage is not just to achieve higher accuracy, but to actually maximize defenders' expected utility by planning better patrol coverage. And so this change in the loss function, which is derived automatically by doing this end-to-end learning, or what we've been calling decision-focused learning, allows us to actually, in simulation, lead to better results. So the blue line shows the expected utility if we adopt this kind of game-focused learning by changing the loss function to adapt to the actual task we are trying to achieve. This is, again, exciting in terms of trying to test this idea out in the field. So something that we are looking at doing next. So having looked at the success of our pilot, of our predictions across the globe in Uganda and Cambodia, we've been collaborating with this organization called SMART, and I'll come to them a little bit later again, to spread SMART over into hundreds of national parks around the globe. And whereas something like Sri Pak Wildlife Sanctuary has, 45,000 patrol observations in the last 5 years, there's other parks like this Royal Belem Park in Malaysia, which has very few observations. So there are parks that are data rich where we can do all of this predictive model and game focused learning and all of that good stuff. But then there is the data poor park, data scarce parks, where we have to figure out where to patrol actually to collect data. And so there's this exploration exploitation trade-off there in terms of improving the predictive model. But if you just keep exploring to try to get more data, then you'll start losing wildlife. And so there's this exploration exploitation trade-off that needs to be accomplished. And to that end, we have this newer model called Lizard, which is a bandit algorithm, which is a paper that was published in AAAI 2021, which basically takes the end targets in the park as input, given a time horizon, tells us which targets to patrol based on what gets found. In the interest of time, I'm going to move ahead. I'm going to talk a little bit about this work on SPOT, and then end by opening up for questions. So SPOT is this idea that work with a nonprofit called Air Shepherd, which flies drones in Kruger National Park and other parts of the world. And so they take videos, or have taken videos, infrared videos, and they beam those videos, send those videos to a van at night to try to see if there are poachers in the park. You can see some of the still images from those videos. And you're trying to figure out, a human being is trying to look at those and try to see is there a poacher from this video, because you can see the Video is taken from a drone, infrared, late at night, and it's from some high angle up there. It's very difficult for a human being. So Spot tries to automatically detect poachers and animals from these videos to simplify the goal for the uh, human being to notice poachers, and if so, then they can alert rangers to come in and stop these poachers. So there's more that I can cover, but I'm going to skip over some of the signaling work in the interest of time and tell you that PAWS is now going global. The PAWS system is the one that predicts where poachers are setting traps or snares. We've been collaborating with this organization called SMART, which is a collaboration of 13 different conservation organizations such as WWF, WCS, and others. And PAWS is now available globally to hundreds of national parks to download and to use it to make predictions about where poachers are setting traps and try to remove them. This is work where there's now field testing going on beyond just what we did in Uganda and Cambodia in parks around the world. It's really very exciting in terms of all that is getting accomplished. And we hope that this system will now ultimately help us save wildlife and assist rangers who are putting their lives on the line to save wildlife around the globe. And hopefully this can then be extended towards protecting forests, fisheries, and others. So I'll end here by drawing some key lessons that we have learned in our work. First, achieving social impact and AI innovation go hand in hand. It's not the case that in trying to achieve social impact with our work that we have to give up on AI research. In fact, achieving the social impact leads to newer kind of AI research innovations. Secondly, we have to take a whole data to deployment pipeline. We have to embrace the whole pipeline. This work is not just about improving algorithms. We actually have to show results on the ground to show improvement, which means that there have to be new ways of evaluating this work, not just by seeing if there was an improvement in the algorithm, because maybe you improved this algorithm, but it had no impact in terms of what it accomplished. It's important to step out of the lab and into the field. Again and again, we see that going into the field and observing what is going on firsthand allows us to draw new insights into our models and algorithms. Of course, AI is not by itself going to solve these problems. We need to embrace interdisciplinary work, whether with social work colleagues or conservation scientists and others. Lack of data is a norm. The social network was not available to us. Who's taking their medicine and who's not is not available to us. So that's why we need these bandit algorithms. In the national parks, some of the parks have very little data. So all of this we have to embrace as part of our project strategy. We cannot just complain that, oh, there's not good data, so I'm going to not do this project. And finally, our ultimate goal really is to empower these nonprofits to use our AI tools and avoid being gatekeepers to this AI technology for social impact. So I'm going to stop here. I wanted to acknowledge collaboration from wonderful colleagues from many different organizations. And I'm open to collaborating with the members of the audience who want to focus on AI for social impact. There's my Twitter handle as well, in case you wanted to follow up on some of our recent work. And again, I'll end here by thanking Sajal for inviting me and really appreciate this opportunity. And now we can take some questions. Thank you.
Sure. But before that, Milind, thank you very much for a very exciting talk, which is not only grounded in basic science, applied science also has a social impact, right? Which impacts all of us in daily life. So let us all first thank Professor Milind.
Thank you.
So I'll be asking people in order of the questions that I see on the chat, and then after that it will be open to the floor. Okay. So Perry, are you still there?
Yes, I am.
Yeah, please do ask your question.
Okay, so I was kind of curious when we were talking about the HIV social network tracking. Were you using, like, it kind of reminded me of Erdős's random graphs. Were you using something like Erdős's random graphs and then using the information you were collecting from the shelters to kind of inform the probabilities around that, or is that kind of what you were doing?
So what's happening there is, first, we are only looking at the graph structure. We are not using any demographic data,
Okay.
the race, gender, nothing. So we are just collecting graph data. And then based on the structure of the graph, the influence maximization algorithm strategically selects which youth to bring in for, offering them education about HIV. So the previous approach, which was bring in the most popular youth, that is bring in all the nodes that have the highest degree, they end up concentrating all of the information and education on the center of the graph. So all of these people know each other, they're very high degree, they spread messages amongst each other, which means that a lot of the sub communities in the network, as we discussed, the graph has many sub communities, they don't get as much information. Whereas our influence maximization algorithms are strategic. They'll pick different parts of the network from where to pull the peer leaders and have them spread information, and that is why it is more effective in spreading information. Does that kind of answer your question?
A bit, yeah. I was curious. Well, I guess ultimately, I kind of pull back. Every single one of your projects had me wondering, if you did any kind of comparison against, just kind of randomly selected populations to determine if the model was significantly better than just randomly selected populations. But yeah.
So when you say randomly selected, you mean randomly selected peer leaders or something like that?
Randomly selected peer leaders, maybe random selected locations within the parks, because I think I had similar question with, pause and that kind of stuff.
No, so no, that's really very, very important. So certainly we have done lots of simulations, for example, let's take the social networks work. We've certainly done lots of work where you, randomly select peer leaders instead of being strategic about it. Now, in the real world, when we want to do this large scale study, we have to be a little bit careful because this is, so we have to compare it with what is currently employed in practice, because that's what they do. And we want to show them that we beat their current approach, so that once they see that their approach is beaten, then they can be persuaded as to adopting our approach. So,
Right.
so that's what was done. And that's a very, very interesting question with respect to trying to show against random strategies. There are other domains where we have done that, but I'll come back to this question a little later based on the time available. Thank you. Excellent question.
Thanks, Perry. Sid, you are next. Sid, are you there?
He's muted.
Sid?
Yes, sorry, I was muted.
Yeah.
I just started talking without even realizing I was muted.
Sure.
Thank you, Professor Tambe, for the talk. It was very nice. I was curious. I mean, most of your work involved interacting with people, and there is only one place where you mentioned using bounded rationality models, especially when it comes down to poachers. I was wondering what specific models better describe poachers' behaviors, and have you looked at using bounded rationality to even model, pregnant women behavior when they were handling calls, so on and so forth?
Excellent. So in the network models, for example, we have used a very standard approach in terms of nodes reception and transmission of the messages. It would be very interesting to extend it, to use some other kinds of, somehow to integrate reasoning about bounded rationality there. So in other words, where you don't see bounded rationality being integrated, it's a research opportunity. It's just that we haven't gotten there yet. With respect to the national parks, the history is something like this. We did initial work using quantum response type models. And so that was our first go-to. So this was done before we actually got data from the park. So we would do human subject studies in the lab, and then we came up with our own model. There's a rich history of papers. There's one in the AI journal called SHARP, which combines the quantum response with all sorts of additional modeling assumptions about what we have seen with human subjects in the lab. So we were very pleased with these sets of models. But then we started getting real data from real parks, and we suddenly started realizing, whereas in the lab, we have tons of data available with human subjects in terms of what choices they made, where they failed, where they succeeded. You can track one single individual from one trial to the next to the next. In the national parks, you have this very limited data. You don't know which poacher put snares where. All you have is location of snares. And so from that, to apply these more complicated models which depended on knowing how a single poacher behaved over time and so forth, became very difficult. And over time we realized that the models that the other thing was that these organizations also have severe resource limits. So you can't tell them, run this very complicated Markov model, hidden Markov model or something, because the computational resources really are truly limited. And so therefore you have to come up with a model that is fast and yet can work with this very limited amount of data. So what has worked well is actually ensembles or decision trees. We've shown that even Gaussian processes, GPs work better ensembles, but they just computational resource limits means even those are not workable. And so we end up in the actual system that is actually being used, it's an ensemble of decision trees because that's all they can afford to pay for.
In fact, I myself am working on a similar problem. I've taken content moderation as an application. So content moderators go through a lot of mental deterioration as they work through extreme sensitive data. And we try to model their decisions using discounted satisficing, and we model them as bandits, and we try to predict when they would stop working, because content moderation industry has a lot of worker sustenance issues, and we are trying to do that as of now as we speak, and a paper will probably roll out very soon. And I was excited when you were talking about similar problems in other applications as well.
No, that's
one final question: do you think the data is available out online openly? The work for all the works that you're doing?
So first of all, thank you for the great work that you yourself are doing. I would love to follow up on the paper that you mentioned. Some of the data are and some are not. The poaching data, if you are a national park and you want the data, or if you are a researcher, who they trust, these organizations would be willing to share data like WWF, WCS, etc. The worry is not to make it completely open source because poachers may download the data, and so they don't want that. But yeah, I mean, if you are a researcher, you can negotiate with them and get agreements. There are other researchers who are who have access to this data and so forth, and study, and their papers published and so on in different conservation journals. Same with the social network data. Some of the social work organizations or our colleagues would be willing to share. There is no secrecy there. There is just maybe some privacy issues or something that they may be guarding against, and that should be released in the public domain. So where possible, the data, certainly all the code, all the algorithms, all of that is public domain. So that is all you're free to download. Like the agent model for COVID that I mentioned, it's freely available, easily downloadable, workable, etc.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good. Milind, there are a couple of other questions that I see on the chat. So Sainath, you are next.
Hello, Professor Tambe. So I've actually had very similar questions to Dr. said. So I guess you have already answered my questions, so I'll be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So Manoj, you're next then. Yeah, sometimes you may get the questions answered already, so there's no need to ask again.
Thank you, Dr. Das. Professor Milind, this was a very insightful talk. Thank you for that. And my question is, like, you already mentioned about the limited amount of data, and like I see these are the like non-traditional applications of AI and machine learning. So with this limited and unstructured data, how are you approaching this, like in terms of algorithms and methods, and like how is that, like how's the difference translating in real world?
Excellent question. I think one of the key things that's happening here is that, when we started working on these domains, AI for social impact, whether in conservation, public health, public safety, and others, around, everybody would keep talking about, hey, there's so much big data, and we should be, the big data is very fashionable and all of that. I would fly into airports even, like and see big advertisements for big data, and we were always struggling with limited amounts of data, and I used to always wonder what is going on here. But it is truly the case that if you're working with these communities, these marginalized communities, endangered communities, endangered wildlife, all of this, and organizations that are really not equipped to collect all of this data, then you have to just work with this limited amount of data available. One of my colleagues who works in suicide, he works with suicide prevention. He gave us like he said, this is the best data set available in the US on suicide prevention among all of the social work colleagues and so forth. And one of my students looked at it, who was working with me at the time, and he said, well, I can't work with this data, it's so messy, and the field's missing and people don't answer questions and all of that. And whereas our colleagues are telling us, look, this is the data. So then the basic point is that the research question is in the data itself, and really to try to figure out what to do with this limited amount of data. So I would say that a lot of our research is focused on, what to do with this limited amount of data and what kind of strategies do we adopt. So network sampling or the bandit algorithms or other kinds of, techniques that compensate for the limited amount of data. Those have to be like our, those end up being sort of major challenges to deal with in research. And on the other, and also, as I mentioned, these organizations are unable to invest in vast amounts of computational resources. They don't have that kind of money. And so that means that we have to also come up with lightweight solutions. So it opens up a very interesting and new kind of research problems. I mean, it's not perhaps it may be a little bit too cachet or too sort of blunt to say this, but basically, there's sort of AI for the rich, where there is a lot of data, and then there's the AI for the rest, where we are sort of working with limited data, limited computing resources, and trying to continue to innovate in that area.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
So Milind, I hope you have some time to take a couple of other questions.
Please.
Good. So this is a question from a colleague in material science and engineering. He also applies AI for material science and other things. And his audio is not working, so I'm asking on his behalf, Dr. Aditya Kumar. So in the national park context, the poachers may become more strategic and change their tactics. How do models account for such changes?
So there's two answers here. The first is the obvious changes that the poachers might do, which is that if you say, we point out to the ranger, these are the hotspots, and the rangers only go to the hotspots, then the poachers are going to shift to neighboring areas. And this is where the game theory part comes in, which will say, anticipate where the poachers are going to go. So for example, they'll say, well, if we put more pressure on location A, poachers are going to shift to location B. And so a game theoretic algorithm will try to randomize over A and B so that it has anticipated the poacher's next move. So that is the more obvious answer. But what we have also observed, like in Cambodia, when the poachers realize that a large number of their traps, many more, are being confiscated and removed, they actually came in a larger force with guns and attacked the rangers. Just before we went to Cambodia, actually, the rangers had gotten into a firefight, and one of the rangers was hospitalized as a result of injuries. So this is clearly an escalation in terms of strategies. It's sort of going beyond the game that we've modeled into a more escalatory strategy, and that is obviously something that we would have to think about. So on the one hand, the more obvious things we can anticipate, we can build up a more robust approach to machine learning and so forth. And this must be done in order to deal with these immediate responses. And but it's a very interesting question as to what might be the reaction of the adversary beyond the obvious things that we can anticipate and deal with.
Good. So another question he has in the M Mitra example for the mother-child context, it appears that the models were making predictions regarding who will drop out based on how frequently they were responding to automated phone chat box. Uh, so let me just see. I totally lost the question. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
The observation is correct. It is looking at past behavior in terms of which phone calls are being listened to. Also, I should mention we do use some demographic information in that case in terms of, is it your first child, second child, things of that nature, in order to improve the accuracy of our predictions. So yeah, this is the observation is correct.
Good. So I have one question. So let's say you're having this game strategy or the learning methods and all, right? Now, assuming that everything will work in a foolproof manner, but what about if the lesser rangers are compromised? That somebody tries to, right? So in that case, so that means that's more like a security or adversarial attack type of questions, right?
No, this is this is excellent. So we've done some of this. So for example, what you're pointing out is, the ranger, somebody is an insider threat in the sense that they will call the poachers and say, today we are patrolling this area in the north. The south is totally free. Go and attack it. Nobody's there. Something like that. So that's a very much more difficult question. We don't have a very good answer. One thing we have tried to do is to add extra randomization in the game theoretic strategy to try to make sure that you can't easily figure out what is going to happen. So these are things whereby essentially you can try and make sure that your strategy is more and like highly randomized or something like that. But it's a very interesting issue. It's certainly a very relevant issue in some of the contexts that we work in, where there may be corruption or other things that may be going on. And
that's right. So there could be national adversaries working, right, and investing a lot to compromise. Yeah.
No, it's a excellent point. And then how to handle it becomes a very interesting question. And some of this may have a technical answer in terms of what can we do within our algorithms to extra randomize it, to add more security, etc., etc. And some of it may be beyond, where really the answer is some kind of policy change at a much higher level. But it's a very important question, and we haven't addressed it.
In particular, sometimes we do AI for security, but here it is like security for AI, right? So how to take the
yes,
right? So, because your security or learning algorithm itself is not secure.
So where in our our UAI paper in 2020, we looked at what if the poachers, I mean, they're not there yet, but what if the poachers sort of figure out that there's a machine learning algorithm at work, and they try to fool the machine learning algorithm by changing where the traps are. So that we have started to address to some extent. But once you derive a policy and you say, okay, this is going to be your patrolling strategy today, and the rangers deliberately leak that strategy to the poachers and things like that, then of course we run into more trouble. But
these are good research questions, right? As you mentioned.
I agree. Yeah, this is.
So maybe we'll take one more question. Sainath, you have one more question, because I think Professor Tambe is speaking for quite a lot now. So
yes. Thank you so much, Professor Tambe. So I have a question. What would be the case when we don't have the entire information about all the choices in the strategy space? So
in the game, you mean we
yes.
So information about I assume about the adversary. If we are playing the game, we know what we are capable of, and so we know our own strategy, right? So it's really like what I'm imagining you're asking is we don't know what nature is capable of, for example, right? Is that kind of a good understanding of the question?
Uh, yes, and also, what if the adversaries' choices in the strategy space are unknown to us? So he might have many different other strategies also, right?
Yeah, I mean, again, very interesting question. I guess you can certainly imagine being robust to some lack of information about the adversary. Previously, we had talked about bounded rationality, so we could imagine that we don't know the parameters of the bounded rationality model very well. There may be uncertainty as to what the adversary finds attractive. And so we don't have full knowledge of their space, and so we can be robust to that. So we can say, okay, that we don't have exact information about the adversary's level of being attracted to different targets, but it is within a certain range, and be robust to those sorts of behaviors. But if there are completely new strategies that you have absolutely no idea about, then that certainly becomes very difficult to deal from within the game, right? So you are assuming that they are going to bring traps or snares to try to kill animals, but they come with guns. Then if you don't know about it, it's hard to anticipate what to do about it. So that's clearly a very interesting and open question. We haven't dealt with that. But
It will be more like online learning, right? And online games, because you just learn as we go and then try to figure out the best possible actions.
Right. No, I that's a very interesting thing. We haven't done it, but a very interesting question to think about.
Are there other questions? So Milind, you'll be glad to know that at a steady state during your presentation, we had 60 plus audience all the time.
Thank you.
As large as 66 and more. And even during the question answer session, 20 minutes after the hour, you still have 40 plus, and steady state was 45 plus. So
Awesome.
So your talk has created a lot of interest in the topic, as well as all the exciting projects that you are having.
I'm very grateful to the whole audience for having listened to me, and just very exciting to hear all the questions. Very, very interesting conversation. Thank you so much for inviting me.